We've traveled long and far since this program began, but I told you early on that we would focus on three broad themes: taste and flavor, cooking technique, and the importance of good quality ingredients. What it takes to leverage those three ideas into a meal is not simple, and that's what we're going to do today. Now, I went off to the farmer's market because I think good ingredients are at the heart of a meal, and I brought a number of things home with me, so let's get started cooking. So the first course should be something fun, something flavorful, something thought-provoking. Your goal is to engage not just the sense of taste and flavor, but all the senses. Food can be aromatic, it can be distinctly textural, it has visual appeal, it smells like something. So you want to wake people's senses up. We're going to make a Spanish tortilla, which may be kind of an interesting thing for people. They likely know a Mexican tortilla already, but this is more akin to an omelet. So think back to what we learned when we were busy with eggs. What you see here is potatoes and onions and peppers, these three ingredients that I've cooked together in a lot of oil. I cooked it until the potatoes were already on their way to being tender, and then I added onions and peppers and continued to cook until all of this was completely tender. Now, I didn't cook them so hot that the potatoes began to brown. Instead, I cooked them gently so that the potatoes could absorb the wonderful flavor of the olive oil that I brought back from the market. The secret of this dish is really having the luxury of tasting the olive oil. So I've cooled those things down. I have them all set and ready to go. And we're going to bind them with just enough egg so that they will hold together. If we put too much egg, it will become a little bit rubbery, and that's not what we want at all. And in goes all of the vegetables. Better that the potatoes should be overcooked a little bit rather than undercooked. We're going to season this with salt and pepper. And, take a good look at the volume of food. That will help you understand how much seasoning you're going to need. Just enough egg to bind this together. All right, I have a pan on the heat. If you've got a nonstick pan, I would say this is a great time to use it. And I'm going to introduce some olive oil. And we'll start with a hot pan. And what we're going to do is cook this mixture in a hot pan so that it sets on the outside, and then I'm going to turn it out onto a plate and flip it over and let it cook the rest of the way so that the egg is cooked throughout. Right into the hot pan. And if the pan is hot, what you will notice right away is that this omelet slides easily in the pan. It's not stuck anywhere. From that point forward, I can turn it down because I don't want it to cook too aggressively. I don't want it burnt on the bottom by the time it starts to cook in the middle. So let me adjust the heat so I see some nice bubbling around the outside. So this has been cooking now for about 5 minutes. You can see the eggs are starting to set and it slides freely in the pan. What I want to do is turn it out of the pan and then slide it back in again. And I'll show you what that looks like. Take a plate that's slightly bigger and then make sure you know what you're doing before you move ahead. You have to commit to this. So I'm going to flip the entire thing over, just like that. Whoops, there we are. And I'll put the pan back on the heat. And what I want to do is introduce just a little bit more oil. And we're going to take this and slide it back into the pan, just like this. And while it's still a little bit soft, what I want to do is shape the edges fold the edges underneath so that it comes out nice and round. And we'll cook it on the second side for probably another 5 to 10 minutes. But what we're looking for is the center of it to be firm, the eggs to be cooked all the way through. And a very gentle heat is all you need. Now that we've got it shaped, we can leave it alone, and that will be happily bubbling away while we're busy making the sauce that will accompany that tortilla. Okay, so here's what the sauce is going to be. We're going to make a mayonnaise. And I'm going to fix this bowl so that it doesn't skitter around with a damp towel. And in the bowl, we are going to put 1 egg yolk. There it is right there. The egg yolk will provide the emulsifiers that will allow us to combine lemon juice and oil, which ordinarily don't like one another, okay? The egg yolk should be warm, as should all the ingredients. This particular mayonnaise is going to be a garlic mayonnaise, and so I'm going to start with a little bit of garlic added to this pan. I think I may have warned you about this before. You can always add more garlic, but it's very difficult to take it out. So just practice a little bit of restraint. I'm also going to add just a little bit of mustard. All right. Now, the acidity that's going into our mayonnaise is going to be lemon juice. And just a drop or two to begin with. And off we go. I'm going to whip this together. And to establish an emulsion, what we need to do is drizzle in, drop by drop, the oil. Now, we've already made a hollandaise together. A hollandaise is very similar, except rather than using oil, we're using butter for a hollandaise. So be a little bit careful. We don't have to cook the eggs here. Just drizzle in, drop by drop, oil until we begin to see an emulsion start to form. This mixture should never look oily. Don't let it get oily ever. And the way that you'll know that an emulsion has begun to form is it'll start to look creamy and a little bit thick. Remember, what we're trying to do here is disperse oil into the continuous phase, which is this egg yolk. And so whipping aggressively will help with that dispersal. Maybe you can see in here already, it's starting to get just a little bit thick. That's a great sign. That's exactly what we want to see. As we add more oil, it begins to get thicker and thicker. And my understanding of this, imagine that you're on a streetcar. And the more people you pack into that streetcar, the tighter and tighter it gets. Here, the same thing. The more oil droplets we disperse in this continuous phase, and the tighter it gets, the thicker it will seem. So at some point, we may decide that we want to relax this just a little bit, and we can do it by adding a little bit of liquid. And even with a drop or two of liquid, you will noticeably see how the mayonnaise begins to relax. We've increased the continuous phase, and so there's more room for the dispersed phase, which is oil. And then we can carry on. If you ignore the fact that it's getting very, very thick, you can run into problems with it breaking. So don't ignore the fact that it's getting really thick and gloppy. Once the emulsion is established, you can be a little more cavalier in how quickly you add the oil. But if it ever starts looking greasy, you know you're going too fast. Greasy or oily. It should always look kind of creamy. Now I'm going to stop here for just a second and season it with salt. It's a good idea to season with salt early because in something very thick, sometimes it's difficult for the salt to dissolve. If you reach a point where you can't add any more lemon juice because it's already too tart, you can relax it with just a little bit of water as well. And for one yolk, I usually put about a half a cup of oil. All right, one last addition of water. And our sauce is done. Let me clean up here. And if you look here, if I press this in the middle, it's not quite done. The good news is I have one here that I cooked a little bit earlier. So we're going to take that and I'm going to slide it from the pan out. And typically, when I serve these, I cut a small one like this up into 8 pieces, let's say. And we'll transfer that to a plate. And I think I'll leave this one slice out so that it fills this plate nicely without being too crowded. This is a nice informal first course that eats really well at room temperature. I wouldn't add the mayonnaise until you're ready to go, but you can make this well ahead of time, and that will be the start of our meal. Spanish tortilla with garlic mayonnaise, aioli. The next thing I'd like to show you how to make is potato gnocchi. And this time of the year when the tomatoes are so delicious, potato gnocchi with a pesto sauce, I think is really a great choice. Now, when you're making meals like this, give yourself a little bit of a break. Don't make things one after another that demand your full, undivided, last-minute attention. Even if the dishes are great, you will learn to hate them very, very quickly. So, our tortilla can be done ahead. The mayonnaise can be in the refrigerator, the tortilla at room temperature, and it'll keep very nicely for 3 or 4 hours. The gnocchi, I can make the gnocchi ahead, but they need some cooking right at the last minute. They need some attention. So I'm going to serve them with a simple tomato salad that can be done ahead. And that way, with the first course done ahead, the salad done ahead, then the gnocchi can take some of my time and attention. This piece of it can be done far ahead. Likewise, the pesto I'm going to be making can be done the day before even. So let's get started. I'm going to make some pesto to begin with. And I've got the blender or the food processor here. For me, it starts with lots and lots of basil. And as I walked the market yesterday, every time I got anywhere near basil, it was an aromatic delight. So that's what convinced me that I wanted to buy and make pesto. A couple of cloves of garlic can go in here. And let's go ahead and start the process of grinding this down. I'm also going to add some toasted pine nuts to this. And while it runs, I'm going to introduce some oil, good quality olive oil. So scrape the sides down so that it grinds evenly, but we are almost done. I want to make sure that I get some seasoning in this as well. So there is pepper and a good deal of salt. I still have cheese to go in here, but I'm careful to add the cheese at the end. Sometimes things can heat up here, and if it gets too hot, the cheese can melt and become a little bit problematic. So always add the cheese at the end. And that is all there is to that, save for the tasting. Good. This can be done well in advance. It keeps really well, so if I make a batch, usually I make a large batch. If I put it in the freezer, I just top it with a little bit more olive oil so that it won't oxidize, and then it can go into the freezer or the refrigerator if you think you'll use it up within a week or so. Okay, on to gnocchi. What I have here are potatoes, and you can see them boiling over here. Once they're drained and come out of the water, these are russet potatoes, I put them on a sheet pan like this and pop them into the oven so that they can steam dry. 350-degree oven, maybe for 5-10 minutes. And then they get riced, and I spread them out, as you see here, so that they can continue to steam just a little bit more. And I am a big fan of mixing these right on the board. So I'm going to dump these potatoes right out. And gather them up until they're about as thick as a steak. And I do that so that I can season them, because I know how to season a steak. I'm comfortable with seasoning a steak. So I'm going to season them with salt. I'm going to season them with pepper. I love a little pinch of nutmeg. And then this particular recipe, I'm going to add some Parmesan cheese right to the dough. We'll bring all this together. I'll make a little well inside, and in goes an egg, and then a second. And what I want to do is mix that egg into the potato. And we're going to introduce flour. And the flour is variable, but I want enough flour so that I get a dough that is moist but not sticky. Now, early on, when I started making gnocchi, I thought that the secret to a lighter gnocchi was making sure not to over-knead the dough. And I'm not going to knead it any more than I think I have to, but a certain amount of kneading is essential so that the dough will stick together and it will hold its shape a little bit later on when we start to roll the gnocchi out. That feels pretty good. I'm going to clean things up here a little bit. So we have a dough that is moist but doesn't stick to my hands. And I'm going to take a portion of that dough and I'm going to roll it out. And I'm going to roll it on flour into a log. The idea being that when I cook these, they will be about twice the size, so don't make them too large. And this is more of a finesse move than a power move here. So feel for those areas that are a little bit thicker. Put maybe a little more pressure there. And if it gets too long, cut it in half and carry on. I would say these are about 3/4 of an inch around. And I'm going to cut them into about 3/4 inch pieces. And I'm going to roll each of these pieces to break the hard edges on the outside. So roll them briefly so that there are no hard edges on them. Almost like you're rolling a little ball. Traditionally, this is a celebratory dish, and people would gather around the table and tell stories, and the work would go very, very quickly. So I would encourage you to find somebody to help. Find somebody to share the labor. We're going to put them onto this sheet pan that I'm going to flour so that they won't stick. And let me show you how they should be shaped. I have a little board here, and it is made specifically for gnocchi. It is ridged on one side, and what I want to do is roll the gnocchi down this with my thumb, push with my thumb down and forward, almost like a J. The challenge with gnocchi is this, that if I were to cook this, it would cook, but because it's so thick, it will take a long time to cook. The outside would get soft, the inside would take its time to cook, and it would be a little bit slimy and unpleasant when all was said and done. So along comes this board, and we press down and forward, and we've done a number of things. We put texture on the outside, and you can see it right here. That's the texture left behind by the board. But we've also put a little dimple in the back. In effect, we have flattened this out. So texture on one side, flattened it so it cooks quickly, and a little hollow that will accept sauce. That's exactly what we want. So I'm going to do this on the board so it's a little easier for you to see. You press down and forward, and you let it curl around your thumb. There should be enough tension in this dough that it will curl around your thumb as you push forward. So what I'm not doing is this, and then folding it in like that. Instead, I'm going down and forward at the same time. Now, it's possible that you've seen this done with a fork. A fork works as well. But if you can find one of these little gnocchi boards, I would encourage that. I think they're great. Once you get the hang of it, it goes very, very quickly. You can do this ahead, and likely should do this ahead. No guest should stand and wait for this. I think it's a good idea to test a couple. So I'm going to put them into the water. The balance I'm going to transfer over to this pan. These can be made ahead and frozen. And I would freeze them in an open pan like this, and then later on, once they were frozen, you could take them off and put them into a Ziploc bag. Now, the ones that I put in there sank to the bottom, which is indicative of their being fairly dense. But as they cook, they become lighter. And as they become lighter and less dense, I should see them floating up to the top, which is exactly what happened here. I'm seeing them all now at the top, and they hold their shape very, very nicely. Typically, later on, I will take them out and toss them in a sauce, so I don't want them to cook too much more, but they should float up to the top, and they should hold their shape just like this. That's just what we want. So I'm going to shape the rest of these, get them in the freezer, and meet you back here to make a quick dessert. Okay, it's time for dessert. Now, we've got one course just before this that's going to demand a little bit of our time and attention. So if we could have something that's ready to go, I think that would be great. I'm a big fan of desserts that are a little bit smaller. In fact, I think leaving people wanting more of a particular flavor is far preferable than giving them too much of one flavor. So I'm going to make some turnovers using the pineapple and banana butter that we made earlier. And I'm going to repurpose it with some commercial puff pastry, but I'm going to roll it a little bit thinner because I want to make these turnovers fairly small. So when you roll from the center to the outside is the order of the day, and you need to make sure that the pastry is moving as you roll, and if it doesn't, then it's a good idea just to get underneath it and make sure that there is plenty of flour so that it can slide rather than stick. And again, from the center to the outside. All right, so the dough has been rolled out a little bit larger, and I am going to cut it into 3-inch strips. And then here, we'll cut it again. I'm going to put a little dollop of filling on each. And then, so that these stick together, we're going to make sure to put a little bit of egg wash. This is egg that's been beaten with, 1 egg beaten with a tablespoon or so of water. Now, to shape these, you want to bring the pastry up and over the filling and try not to get any air pockets in there, and try to make sure that it seals completely. So no air pockets and a good seal. If you want to put a little decorative edge on it, you can do that. Just press it with a fork. And then we're going to transfer these right over to a pan so that they can bake. Give them a little bit of room so that the heat can circulate all around them. And maybe the smartest way of doing this is to have them all pointing one direction. And then when you come back, they can point in the other direction. And then finally, go in the third direction. Before they go into the oven, we're going to brush them with egg wash so they have a nice shine and they brown nicely. Not so much egg wash that each of them has a little pool of scrambled eggs around them once they've baked. Just enough to give it a shine. And if you can avoid coating the cut edge of the dough, this will rise much more effectively if the cut edge is not glued together with egg. I would bake these, something small like this, at about 400 degrees. They will bake fairly quickly. The dough should get a chance to brown nicely. Not just on the top, but on the bottom as well. The egg will brown easily, but you want the pastry to brown. You want it to be nice and crisp. And so don't be impatient. Give it enough time to brown properly. This dough, because it has layers upon layers of pastry, as it bakes, it will puff up, and you'll see them in just a second. So these little empanadas with pineapple and banana filling, we're going to serve with an ice cream later on. Well, the rest of our meal is done. We just have to finish our gnocchi. We've got the Spanish tortilla with garlic mayonnaise. I made a really beautiful tomato salad. And when we have gnocchi that has pesto on it, that basil will really do wonderful things here. And then we have our turnovers, which are out of the oven. They baked for about 15 minutes at about 400 degrees. So let's get these gnocchi started. I've got the water in the back. It's boiling. And we're going to slip these right into the water. Now, like any other pasta, gnocchi like to swim around, so make sure there's plenty of water. And while those are boiling, I'm going to make a very simple sauce in the pan, which is nothing more than some pesto, a little dollop of pesto that we made earlier, and some pasta water. That's the whole shooting match. And what might surprise you is how thirsty gnocchi are when they come out of the water. There's a lot of starch in there, and that starch wants to drink up moisture. So you can see this sauce that I have here is pretty watery. And that watery sauce will turn into a creamy, thick sauce as soon as this gnocchi go in. Remember what you're looking for here. You want the gnocchi to rise to the surface. That tells you that now they're less dense than they were. And these are all coming up. I'm going to give them just a second or two more. And why don't I move this over so it's easier for you to see. The gnocchi have floated to the surface. They go right into this pan. And we'll put it over high heat. I want that sauce to come up to a simmer, and the gnocchi themselves will absorb all that excess moisture. Now it's going to be happening right in this pan very, very quickly. You could do gnocchi like this with brown butter and sage and a little bit of Parmesan. In the winter, I like it with cream and gorgonzola and maybe some toasted walnuts. All right, that's all it took. I'm going to add a little bit of cheese here to the pan. And we will slide these right into the dish. A little bit more cheese over the top, and some fresh black pepper. And that's that. Now, to accompany this, Pinot Noir, you couldn't have a better choice. Pinot loves potatoes. Pinot loves tomatoes. Pinot loves the sweet spice that you get from pesto. So Pinot Noir is a great choice there. And then over here for dessert, I poured some dessert wine. This is a Botrytis-sized dessert wine. And some people would say that dessert wine is dessert enough. I love dessert wine with some simple cookie like this. This is a little shortbread with lavender and orange. Or you can have it with the turnovers that we made earlier. Because these turnovers have fruit in them, I think they're a great combination with a dry cheese like a Gouda, or in this case, the Dry Jack. And if there is one wine that does really nice things with a broad selection of cheese, I would say it's dessert wine. So this is a great little combination here. Start with this, move on to the pesto, the tomato salad, and finish up with a dessert wine. I think this is a really nice meal, and I think you could enjoy it. I'd like to share one last lesson with you, and I think it's an important one. If I were to ask my students one simple question, is cooking art? Everyone in my class would throw their hands up and almost in unison say, yes, chef, cooking is art. And I can imagine it's really disappointing when I say to them, you know, I don't think it is art. I think instead it's a craft. And they fight me on that. But we carry on. I said, if it's important that it be an art form to you, then here's what I would suggest. Like any art form, learn your medium. Learn about the techniques and the ingredients. Learn to taste. Little by little, through craftsmanship, you'll become a better craftsman. And at some point, you'll have so much talent and skill in the realm of craft that suddenly you can say something through your craft that's important, that you can communicate to someone else and sort of elevate your craft to an art form. Now, it may take you a while to get there. I think every chef wishes they were a better chef, and there's always an opportunity tomorrow to become that better chef. But if you ever find yourself in that position where you put something on the table and you say, you know, that is art, stop for a second, enjoy the moment, and then just carry on.